meeting is also being recorded. I request everyone to please keep their mics on mute and only unmute yourself when we move to the Q&A section. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult. The voice echoes and then it becomes very difficult. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. And on behalf of Wednesdays for Water, Terry School of Advanced Studies, FluxGen Technologies, TIS, Wiki, Counterview, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you to yet another episode of Talks on Wednesdays for Water. And this time our topic is sustainable water management, the rural and urban continuum. Fortunately, today, our talk also coincides with the World Nature Conservation Day. So greetings to all of you. We couldn't have had any better day to hold this discussion. The World Nature Conservation Day talks about preserving our natural resources. That includes, all the resources, the land, water, air resources that are there. And water, of course, around the monsoon season, we have seen so much of water falling everywhere. Our monsoon is becoming so intense. Our cities are finding it so difficult to cope up with the water around. And most of these water then we see entering our homes and destroying lives and property. So we need to really look at managing water better. There is no doubt about it. And at the same time, when we have the lean months, we find that most cities and states in India probably are struggling to meet their requirements for water. Similar is the source with our forest resources, which is probably one of the water repositories. So along with being a carbon sink, it's also a water repository, and we see that we are losing our forest resources as well. India perhaps had more than 700,000 wetlands, and especially in our cities, we have lost anything between 40% to 70% of our wetlands. And again, when we lose our wetlands, actually we lose storage for water. And then finally, these water is lost to runoff, and we are not able to really harvest them to use them during lean season. A very other resource that we talk about is the wastewater. Now, often we consider anything that has the word waste that gets attached to it. We often start treating it as waste also. But let me tell you that wastewater is also a resource which it's just a misplaced resource. And today we are very, very fortunate to have two brilliant speakers with us, Alka and Ranjana, two great friends also. And then a young discussant, Manisha. And on behalf of everyone present here, I would like to thank three of you for joining us in the talk on Wednesdays for Water. So Ranjana is a lecturer in the Terry School of Advanced Studies. She is a BTech in Civil Engineering and MTech in Environmental Engineering. Her PhD is in hydrology. And she has been part of several projects. So she has more than 25 years of experience, has been part of several projects, both on urban and rural water management, including water in irrigation, water in industry. So she looks at water audit, demand management. She also looks at irrigation water management, also urban hydrology. So thank you so much, Ranjana, for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you today. Our second guest today is Alka. And Alka and I first met, because both of us were the Fulbright Hubert H. Humphrey Fellow. And it was such a pleasure to meet you, Alka, at that time. But we have since then remained connected. And Alka is actually a founding director of People in Center at Ahmedabad, India, which is a consulting service organization engaged in developmental works throughout India in partnerships with nonprofits and government. She works with urban and rural communities for community-based management of water resources and services for the last 2 decades. Some of the issues that she has worked include coastal salinity mitigation, wastewater reuse, drinking water provision, and quality and irrigation management. As I said, she holds a master's degree in landscape architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and she is also a Fulbright Hubert H. Humphrey Fellow at MIT in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. She is currently interested in policies and institutional processes. You know, when I start reading, I find it quite boring. So Alka is a passionate, I would say, yeah, she's a passionate water warrior. She has been looking at both fresh water and wastewater. She also looks at how, you know, the wastewater and that we generate in our urban areas, how do we release them into the rural areas, and how do we pollute the water resources, because in India we have only about 35% of the wastewater that gets treated, and most of them find their way into our fresh water bodies. And then this water is being used by the rural community and how they get impacted by that. So that's an area where very few people actually work on, and Alka is one person who works in that area. Alka, we are really honored to have you today with us, and thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us for the talk on Wednesdays for Water. Our third discussant, Manisha, as you see her smiling, again, you know, I met her just a few months ago when we instituted the Wednesdays for Water. And Manisha is an architect and an urban planner. She has done her M.Plan, focused in urban planning, from Malviya National Institute of Technology, Jaipur, and B.Arch from National Institute of Technology, Tiruchirappalli. She already owns a startup, so you can just understand what her passion is all about. So she owns an architectural and planning consultancy firm, Urban Art, based at Jaipur, with a demonstrated history of working in design, architecture, and planning field. Currently, she is also associating with Auroville. Auroville, I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And today she would be presenting some of her work. At the same time, she would be engaging with the two speakers today. So without taking much of your time, I would first like to invite Ranjana to talk about blue-green infrastructure, because we have been seeing flooding all around, and there's a dire need to really arrest this water. And this concept of blue-green infrastructure has been floating around, not that we didn't know. I think हम सबको ये मालूम था कि जंगल भी हमारे लिए कीमती है और पानी भी हमारे लिए कीमती है, लेकिन बस ये है कि हम इन दोनों को आपस में इंटरकनेक्ट नहीं कर पा रहे थे, और इनकी अहमियत को हम नहीं समझ पा रहे थे, क्योंकि हमें सब चीजें जो हैं वो अपने घर के चार दीवारी के अंदर मिल जा रही थी. तो Ranjana, thank you so much, and over to you to take the session forward.
Thank you so much, Fauzia. Indeed, pleasure and an honor to be invited to such a forum. In fact, I have been hearing a lot from her about the Wednesdays for Water, and I was pleasantly surprised when she said that, you know, I should deliver a talk and talk a little bit about one of our projects. And so here I am. I hope I will do justice to the session. So let me just share my screen with you.
So while Ranjana shares her screen, I would request all the participants to keep typing your questions in the chat box. We are continuously monitoring the chat box, and we would be taking up questions at the end, but please do keep typing your questions in the chat box.
Videos. I am sorry, this is not the presentation.
Ranjana, if you can stop sharing, I can share from my end your presentation.
Okay, that will be so nice. Yes, I kept it open, but then I could not. Yeah, so I've stopped sharing. If you can share it, it will be great. Thank you.
I hope all of you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Please start.
Yeah. So, as she announced, I shall be talking about the blue-green infrastructure for urban sustainability, and why it is so important to talk about the blue-green infrastructure, and why urban sustainability is so closely linked to it. Till now, we have not been looking at it as a service the way it should have been looked at. We would just think that it is there and it's very naturally there. but definitely the functions that it has performed or is performing is something that we have not really looked at in the true essence. So, so I will talk first a little bit about the blue-green system, then the green, and then of course the gray infrastructure. So, when we look at the blue-green infrastructure, it is essentially the natural spaces that we have. So, whether it is the natural water bodies, the natural lakes, many lakes in the urban areas have been created over the centuries. Some of them are there for 100, 200 years. Some of them are, of course, recent. So each one of them are these spaces which are, of course, together taken as part of the urban greens or the urban green spaces, and they have these ecosystem services also that they provide. Then we have the green infrastructure. This is now the network of the natural and the partial or the semi-natural network of greens that we have, whether it is trees or it is grass or it is the district parks that we have. Those are all very important part of the green infrastructure. And the gray infrastructure is something which we have traditionally created. Fawzia was just talking about the wastewater treatment infrastructure being only at 35%. Unfortunately, in spite of having so much of water and wastewater treatment plants and these sewerage networks and distribution pipes, yet the treatment of wastewater, the STPs are there, but they're functionally they only treat 35%, and hence our lakes as well as our river bodies are getting so polluted. So how to see to it that the grey infrastructure can be reduced, and with the help of the green infrastructure. That is why we are talking about the decentralized planning. So just to give you an idea about what exactly is the urban blue-green infrastructure, I would like to explain it with the help of Delhi's map. Now, if you look at Delhi's map, Delhi is naturally endowed with the last bit of the Aravalli ranges, what we call as the ridge in Delhi. Now that ridge is nothing but the last bit of the Aravallis that extends till Delhi, and all along the Aravallis we have this forest. So it acts as a green corridor. And if you are familiar with Delhi, you know that till the Tughlaqabad fort on one end and the Purana Kila at the other, these are all parts of the ridge, and this actually forms the southern boundary of Delhi as well. And most of it, of course, as we now know, has been taken over, and a lot of construction is there. Yet the part that is there, it has got the greens. Now, this of course extends to the Sanjayvan urban forest that we have in Delhi. It also extends to the Jahapana forest that we have, and then it goes on till Gurgaon and beyond. Now, this is naturally the greens, whatever is left of it. And the other bit is, of course, the peripheries in the north and west Delhi, where we still have these agriculture fields. And those are also, again, they also perform the function of green infrastructure. Other than that, Delhi has lakes and, of course, the river Yamuna. So these are naturally places which help in the recharge of groundwater. One of the functions that they do perform is the recharge of groundwater, whether it is the flood banks of river Yamuna or the green corridor of the Aravallis. Now, this slide I have specially put here to explain that the hydrological functions of the greens we can never really be very far from it. So right from the canopy, so when we talk in terms of the canopy cover, so even the canopy, example, if there is a high intensity rainfall, then the canopy is the first bit which is able to absorb the rainfall. And when it is absorbing the rainfall, it reduces the velocity and therefore the erosion, and therefore the fast flow that happens on the roads, because we know that because of the impervious surface, from the rainfall to the runoff, there is very little time difference in the urban areas. So then it is not just the canopy interception, then the stem flow, that is through the branches that it goes, and then it drops on the leaf litter absorption. All of them help in absorbing the velocity of the rainfall. And so even if it is a very high intense rainfall, yet each of these help in reducing the velocity. Soil infiltration function is there. The more greens that we have, the more soil we have, and the more possibility of infiltration happening. The evapotranspiration also helps in reducing the runoff that is created. Groundwater recharge, of course, it is not a natural from the soil infiltration, yet it is a huge contribution that is there. And this bit I was talking about conveyance of the large storms through the surface flow as well as the subsurface flow, which happens because of infiltration. And nowhere can the concrete stormwater drainage system match these functions, in the sense that all these stormwater drainage networks have a certain age. They are designed for a life of 25 years, 50 years. In any case, they are not designed to take a 100-year storm or a 50-year return period storm. This is a job that the greens do best. So when we look at the causes of the urban floods, if on the left hand side, if you see, typically what I explained, so if we have the right kind of green covers, then 40% goes through evapotranspiration, 25% is shallow infiltration, and 25% is deep infiltration. This is taken from the US EPA, and 10% only results in runoff. Of course, there are many variations to this. For example, if it has been raining for the last 3 days, or if it has been raining for the past 5 days, then that runoff component is going to increase because of the saturation that will happen in the soil. But overall, this 10% runoff is what we take for an average rainfall. Now, under average rainfall conditions, what we really see is that 40% evapotranspiration has reduced to 30% evapotranspiration. The shallow infiltration is less, the deep infiltration is even lesser. This is because of the impervious surfaces that we have created. So it is not only that we have 55% runoff, but the speed of this runoff is also quite high, because the impervious surfaces, they really allow the water to travel much faster than if it was traveling through the soil layers. Even if it is a soil surface runoff, even that would be slower. So when we look at so this is of course taken from NIUA website, and here you can see that it is a record since 2000, because it is in the last 20 years that we somehow see that these episodes have increased. So they have listed quite a few. Most of the major cities, as you can see, are included here: Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi. And after 2016 also, we regularly hear of the floods occurring, whether it is in Bangalore or in Mumbai or in Hyderabad. And they have, so there is a pattern. And if we study all these cities, we will see that the urban greens and the blues have the urban blue-green infrastructure. They have somehow lost that connect that they used to have throughout the entire city, and there was a hydrological flow, what we call as the natural hydrological channels which carry the water, that somehow seems to be missing in most of these places. So, yeah, so that is definitely a problem. So what we in our project have done, and what I am going to tell you here, is again going back to the basics. And what are these basics? It's essentially the philosophy of detention. That is, we should be able to detain the water. The more water that we detain from the rainfall at site, that wherever the rainfall is heavy, if there we are able to detain the rainfall, then we are able to reduce runoff. And wherever we are detaining, it should have a retention capacity, because infiltration does not happen very fast. It is a slow process. So it is a place which should be able to retain the water and allow infiltration to take place. And of course, it has to, and that's one of the basic ways of preventing floods in a catchment basin. So we need the greens, we need the right kind of hydrological channels, so that we have to create space not only for the greens but also for the blues. And we should allow the infiltration and the groundwater recharge. Definitely we can do it. So these are some of the decentralized infrastructure, as many of you have seen, but the major problem in India, as you know, is also of monitoring. So you can see these rain gardens, the bioswale, what we call. So the rain garden has got more of vegetation, while the bioswale has a passage through which the water can move. So one has a flow, allows flow, the other is allows water to be retained. There are multiple functions that they perform. And we could also have these heritage conservation. So around the monuments, if we have these greens and if we maintain them, then even they help in the functioning. They help in functioning as the urban blue-green infrastructure. So this is the example from Gurgaon, one of our latest projects. So what you see here is the Chakarpur Wazirabad Band. So if you have been to Gurgaon, you will see that from the Aravallis till a certain portion, about 4-5 kilometers, there used to be no construction because the water could come down from the Aravallis, and there was a bund around which the water would be conserved, and groundwater would recharge there quite a bit. But what is left of that bund area is this green corridor, which is managed by the forest department, and this was classically used for dumping solid waste. And this has been it is a citizens group in Gurgaon, in which they have restored the greens here. So they have these kinds of open areas which is filled with muram, and it has got these interceptors. There are those geocells that are placed below this so that the infiltration happens well. And of course, the greens in this area have also been restored, and it is a place through which people can walk regularly. It is a 4-kilometer stretch, so they are trying to restore the entire bund, which extends for a good 7-8 kilometers, or perhaps even a little more. And this is helping in reducing the flow. So the other bit of work, and incidentally, I must tell you that this is a project in which Fauzia, as well as my colleague Shirley, all three of us have worked on this project. So the Aravalli Biodiversity Park is there in Delhi as well as in Gurgaon. This photograph has been taken from the Gurgaon Aravalli Biodiversity Park. So it is this ridge area that has been restored again by IIM Gurgaon, the citizen group who is working there. And any greens that we have, they are hopefully, this area of course I have not studied in detail, so I cannot tell you about the groundwater recharge, but I am hoping that it would definitely lead to that. So this is the project that we have done along the golf course road in Gurgaon. So what we did is that the Aravallis, as you can see, the empty space that you see is towards the right of right of the map is the Aravalli area, whatever is left of the Aravallis. And they call it the creeks, you could call them the small streams, the creek 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these are the storm channels which come down, and they flow to this Chakarpur Wazirabad Bund that I spoke to you about. So on the left of the screen, where you can see the black, red and green and orange line, this is that bund, a picture of which I showed you a little earlier in the previous slide. So all these creeks were supposed to go and meet there. But what really has started happening is, because of the heavy built up area that you see between the golf course road, which is the yellow line, and the bund, there is a massive amount of flooding that happens on that golf course road, and all the underpasses on that road get flooded. It is quite obvious that all these channels have been blocked, that you can see. There is construction debris near the creek 1, which is opposite Shivnadar School, the culvert near the golf course road. I mean, there is no channel which has not been destroyed, if I may put it that way. It is usually filled with construction debris, or it is just choked, and so that is the reason that the water does not flow through these channels. And they only, of course, therefore, where will they flow? The water flows through the roads and goes and occupies these underpasses. So the creek upstream of the DLF, and then the creek after the golf course road. So it is after the golf course road that creek 2 and creek 3 have been. So when you, Fauzia, creek 2 first. Yeah. So thank you. So when we look at this creek 2, there are certain locations in creek 2 which have been recovered, which have been restored. So the creek upstream of the DLF apartment is still in a very poor shape, but downstream of the golf course road, they have been restored, and that again forms a part of the Chakarpur Wazirabad Bund, as you can see. But downstream of the bund also, there are these low-lying areas near Paras Cinema, which was getting heavily flooded. Thank you. Yeah. So then now when we look at the creek 3 also at select locations, again this creek 3, actually what we found is it's very difficult to trace the creek 3 in most places. It has been, it is the creek which we found that it will be most difficult to restore this one, because in places we just won't see the creek, it has just vanished. then in the other place we can see that there is sewage clearly flowing through this. So if there is storm water which is going to flow in addition to this grey water, then the overflowing happens very easily. But fortunately, what we see is that the Tao Devi Lal Biodiversity Park is in the downstream of the Wazirabad Bund, and there are certain places, especially in Creek 4, where there is a potential for recharge, because these are still some open spaces which are left, and if these are being cleaned, so currently they are being cleaned, and this is the area which has a lot of groundwater potential. That is very important to look at, because we know that the groundwater potential of Gurgaon is rapidly dwindling, and it is already in the red zone, as we say, because there is too much of over exploitation of groundwater in Gurgaon. So these are, so when we started, so when we have done this work, there are certain, again, the principle of detention, retention and infiltration has been followed essentially. So when you look at Creek 1, all those blue spaces that you see, those are the retention ponds which have been recommended, so that if they fill up those, then a lot of water will not go downstream. And all along Creek 1 also, we have suggested these green corridors, so that they are able to allow the water to be stored there and groundwater recharge can take place. Because even the Sikandarpur pond area, which again has a forest, that is a little beyond our catchment, but even there is a lot of potential for groundwater recharge to happen. In case of Creek 2, as you can see, there is very little space downstream, such is the kind of urbanization that has happened. So it is along the Chakarpur Wazirabad Bund that we have suggested the recharge wells, because that is a place where we found that there is a lot of thickness of sand that is available. So that sand thickness will allow the water to be absorbed, and slowly groundwater recharge can be done. The other reason why we have done this is because we know that most of the bore wells are located along this space, and so we know that the groundwater potential is the highest in this place, and that is how we can also recharge and increase the groundwater potential of that area. Creek 3 has Creek 3, of course, we know can be restored, but what we find there is that there is what they call the Wazirabad Lake, but that Wazirabad Lake again has got a lot of these buildings now. Many of them do not have a sewerage connection as yet, so a lot of it goes through these stormwater channels, and so the Wazirabad Lake is currently in eutrophicated condition, so we don't really know how to, where is the will. If there is a will and then it can be cleaned, there could be these constructed wetlands, and from there onwards one could take it up beyond that. Then as far as the Creek 4 is concerned, again in the upstream near Ansal University, with the photographs that you saw, that is the place that a lot of restoration or detention has been suggested, and that part of the corridor is still very much a green corridor. The reason being that we saw that the channel is in natural condition, and also the sides have got a park, the Huda Park, and that is how we know that again the recharge potential is there. Now this is an area which has to be restored. One of the reasons why we say this is because of the fact that this is again a low-lying area as we go towards the end of Creek 4, just as it was in Creek 1 near Shiva apartment. And here, if the recharge is not done, the flooding is going to repeatedly come back in this area. So these are problems, of course, which of course have to be looked into a little more detail. Here you can see that this is the Creek 1 area, the detention ponds that we had suggested. A part of these detention ponds are getting created. It's very heartening to note that these ponds are created, because these are areas which were filled with debris, because they found that these depressions are there, so they were filled with debris. So all the debris, the construction material has been removed, and that is how the detention pond is created within that. So this is the restoration work that has been done, and of course, as it says, water stored is water recharged. This is a small video of the first works, and then of course, if you are interested, we can play that later. So implementation of the blue-green system infrastructure, you can see. And so if we are talking in terms of water, housing and transport, if we are able to implement these services, then then there is a lot of function that they do even beyond the storage of water. You can see cleaner air, water quality management, all these things. They somehow, you know, they fit into so many other services which are all as yet only we are discovering. So it is not just surface water reduction and wastewater reduction and energy intensity. It is much more than that. Ultimately, it leads to all of us having a health improvement in our health and overall improvement in our environment. So thank you very much. This is of course a part of Delhi, the Rajokri bit. So and a restoration, some other restoration works are also going certainly. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. And so thank you.
Thank you, Ranjana, for a very comprehensive presentation. In the interest of time, I would like to invite Alka. Alka, if you are there. Alka, as I said, is director is working with People in Center. She's the founder director, and she would be speaking on the wastewater and how the wastewater is being used for agriculture and how we can really treat wastewater as a resource. So over to you, Alka.
Yeah, Fawzia, I'll share my screen.
Please, please. Huh?
Can you see that?
Not yet. It seems that it may be loading, but I cannot see it as of now.
Yeah.
Alka, you'll have to share your full screen. So you have to click that arrow if you're not in Teams, and you can share your full screen.
Now you're able to see? No? Not yet?
Not yet.
Should I send it to you?
Yes, you may please do that.
Send it to you.
While you are trying, you can also send it to me.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I think this is a problem I always face because of Mac.
Not a problem, Alka. You can just mail it across to me and I can share it from my end.
Yeah, I just do that.
Okay, by the time, you know, Alka shares her screen, Ranjana, maybe I'll take up a question with you, which is there in the chat box. Will there be a risk of eutrophication as sewage water will also be diverted into the retention ponds?
So that has been our major concern. So these detention ponds that you see, especially these are in the upstream, and we have seen to it that they are not connected to the nearby residents because those are quite far away. But in the downstream area, which is already heavily built, in those areas, eutrophication is a problem. And therefore, we have suggested construction wetlands, and we have pointed it out to GMDA that they have to see to it that these the sewer lines of these buildings are connected to the municipal sewer rather than to these stormwater channels. And definitely that has to be taken care of. Otherwise, the detention procedure doesn't work without the water being cleaned. Yeah, it has to be cleaned first.
Thank you so much, Ranjana. There's another question for you from Mansi. It says that Delhi has big plans on blue-green grey infra. Hope the plan includes reduction in the consumption of fresh water, thus reducing the production of wastewater. So could you just brief a little about that?
Yes, I don't know about reduction in the consumption. We would be happy if that was there, but we certainly speak about the non-revenue water being reduced, you know, so that that is a massive portion of the loss. And that definitely means that we have to price water in Delhi. And to answer your question indirectly, if we price water, I am hoping we'll reach there about on sustainable consumption. That's a very true, honest answer, as you know.
Thank you so much. Alka, while you are sharing your, mailing me your presentation, would you like to start talking as well? Because
it's that file, so I'm not able to mail it also.
No problem, Alka. You can just switch on your camera and you can speak while it actually comes to me. When it comes to me, I will share it.
That. Yeah, that's better, I think.
While it gets attached, you can.
So sorry.
No, not a problem. I think it's. I should have taken it from you as well.
I think it's.
Maybe she can use Dropbox or some other means to share if the file is very big.
Hello.
Yes, Alka.
John, can you see that?
So.
Okay. I'm so sorry for this.
Camera, you can switch on your camera. So we would love to see you.
John. It's on. It's on.
No, we can't see you. We could see you earlier, but now we can't see you.
Can't you?
No.
I can see myself. You can't? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So you can continue.
No, you can't see me.
No, we can't.
All right. Okay.
But you can continue to speak.
I'm so sorry. I think I can see. Mansi, you can see me? Anyway, so yeah. Good evening to all of you. I'm so sorry for this gopher. Hope that you and your family are as you can be and as well as you can be in these troubled times. I are together practitioners and academics.
And see, you have to stop sharing your
theory and theory forms the practice. I hope to actually I would just look at my presentation and talk probably.
Yes, Alka, you may do that.
Yeah. So yeah. So Indians, probably actually I would start with that. What would connect rural and urban and peri-urban as a continuum? If you see a metaphor of water, it is rivers. Rivers which flow continuously. There is no distinction for them in terms of territory of rural, urban or peri-urban. But however, in the rivers, you see dumping of sewage and effluent, and it is happening to no end. We also have to see that Indians probably are the only people who, worship rivers, except for probably Egyptians. Yet polluting rivers is continuing and it's going on happening. Why does this happen in a country where, Ganga or other rivers are worshipped? Is there a disconnect between the culture, tradition, religion, belief system and behavior pattern? Can it be part of strategy to eliminate this disconnect? Is it possible? That's the first question which I have. The other slide, I had some very good photographs of some of the buildings in Mumbai, which has private swimming pools on each of their floors, which is a building in Bandra called Om Apartment. And on the other side, I have some photographs from the rural areas where people are collecting water for domestic use from ditches, which is not safe, unreliable, and the quantity is also insufficient. They are also bathing in those ditches, which is an unsightly look, and there is always a scarcity of water. So we clearly see that there is always an urban bias when it comes to water supply between rural and urban, because urban territories and urban citizens are economically and politically much more powerful than rural people. On my third slide, what I have is there are these cities, larger cities like Indore, Mumbai, Jodhpur, Chennai, Delhi, or count any other city, which are getting fresh water from distances. And year by year, as the scarcity increases, the distance also increases. and they are powerful enough to get the water from hinterlands, even if it's kilometers away. In my own city of Ahmedabad, we get water from 400 kilometers. Delhi gets it from Terry Dam, which is 500 kilometers. It's like those distances which are going on increasing. On the other hand, urbanization is also increasing. Does this mean that there'll be more water supply to the cities? Yes, there will be more water supplies from wherever they could get. They can either get it by tankers also. There are incidences of getting the water to cities by train. So, but cities would be supplied with water no matter what. And this water, more water also means more wastewater. More wastewater would be generated, but cities have no clue what to do with this wastewater. They really do not plan about it in a comprehensive way. At most, what they would plan is its treatment. But what would happen to its conveyance is absolutely not planned. The treatment also, the sewage treatment plants which are there are performing either poorly or not performing at all for various reasons. As Fawzia just mentioned, that 35% treatment is only happening. That is also on paper, because we know that how many STPs are actually not functioning or not functioning to their fullest of capacities. Eventually, what also happens is that you mix the wastewater which is treated and not treated together in a water body, in a fresh water body. It finds its way into a fresh water body and it gets mixed, so it's contaminated water all the way. So that's what is happening today. So if this is happening, what would happen if the urban areas which are provided fresh water from rural areas, and it is disposing wastewater into rural areas? So there is a kind of circle which happens, that urban area in rural area and rural area provides fresh water to urban areas. This is going on happening. This, in a way is a attractive preposition, because, it deals with two things, two problems of urban areas. One is that non-performance of sewage treatment plants, and second is scarcity of disposal sites. Urban areas really do not have enough sites, even if it's green blue infrastructure or spawn city or any other kind of thing which can absorb the quantum of wastewater which is being generated in these cities. It is really large. If you calculate 135 LPD per person, liter per person per day capacity of drinking water and domestic water provided in the cities, then the quantity of wastewater which is generated is 80% of it. So, zero waste discharge, zero liquid waste discharge, and these things are actually a theoretical preposition. It is not possible to absorb all the wastewater which is generated in a city by itself. It will be going out of the city in some form. So where will it be absorbed? That is the question. In my next slide, I have urban wastewater use for rural agriculture, the past. So I'm talking about, this relation between rural farmers and urban utilities, which is really very, very old, centuries old. In Paris is known to grow orchards and feed London, which was grown in wastewater of London itself. So they used to get the wastewater of London, grow orchard and send the fruits back to London and sell it and make money out of it. Although today, use of wastewater for irrigation is pointed as an unpleasant and undesirable practice with a stigma attached to it. That was not the case in the past when these sewage farms were there. Were actually the treatment systems for wastewater. And that is what was happening. Even in India, my next slide actually shows the map of India where there are 20 cities which had sewage farms. The sewage farms, one of it actually exists in Ahmedabad also. The other one is in Kanpur. Rest of the cities, they are not there. But today, they are not meant to treat wastewater. But because of the older agreements, they are supplied with wastewater. This is happening even today. So the sewage farms are, probably one way by which you can use the land to treat wastewater rather than the conventional STPs, which use a lot of energy also and many a times don't function. The only problem is that cities do not have that kind of land parcels with them. It requires, there is a trade-off when you talk of a conventional STP and a land treatment of wastewater, trade-off between energy and land. If you use more energy, less land is required. If you use less land, more energy would be required. That is the trade-off. Cities will not have land, and therefore they shift to conventional STPs, which require energy. But is there a way that we could really, make these STPs perform? So land treatment of wastewater is one of the option one can think. The question which comes to mind when we talk of sewage farming and everybody raises it, is sewage farming safe? So here I want to pose a question between this contradiction between the health concerns and the livelihood concerns. In around 2 or 3 years back in Madhya Pradesh, the collector of Bhopal, the district magistrate of Bhopal, gave an order to burn the crops of these 5 villages which were growing crops with using wastewater. Now the question again here is that that city is actually passing its burden to farmers and then also punishing them by burning their crops. City is supposed to treat its water and then dispose it out. It has not done that, and the farmers have used it because of lack of water. Scarcity affects them also, and their crop was burnt. So this question keeps on coming. The farmers claim that they've been eating the crops which is grown with wastewater, and there has been no disease with that, and it is perfectly safe, and they've been doing it for many decades. So even the health studies, if you look at them, what you find is most of the health problems which are there in literature is because of industrial contamination. It's not because of the biological contamination so much. Also, the sites from where these public health studies have come out are generally from the temperate countries where the sun and wind is not so strong. Sun acts as a disinfectant. And I believe that domestic water can safely disinfect itself if you expose it to for a sufficient period in sun. So we've done a study about, as a practitioner, we want to know firstly what's happening with a particular resource before really charting out what is to be done. So we carried out a study in 5 states in India, looking at 24 cities, and we found that around about 200 villages were using this wastewater for irrigation. There was not a single opportunity where the availability of wastewater was not harnessed. The net profit by the farmers were very high as compared to freshwater irrigation. The saving for farmer was in terms of energy cost because they didn't have to pump the water from the ground much below. So energy cost was saved. Nutrient available in wastewater also meant that they did not have to apply fertilizer. And lastly, the reliability of its supply, because every day wastewater would be generated and every day they can use it. So it is very reliable as compared to even canal water, where you are at the mercy of the provider, irrigation department. So this was a very attractive thing for farmers, and we've seen places where farmers opted for this rather than canal irrigation also. The practice of wastewater use is not by design. It is not promoted. It is not advocated, but it is happening in most water-stressed developing countries, not only India, in almost all the developing countries. This was wastewater which farmers use. It could be treated, untreated, or mixed. In India, as I told you earlier, that STPs treat water and then mix with the untreated water in a freshwater body. So I really do not know what is the meaning of this treatment. Most importantly, in this about 220 villages which were using wastewater, they were consuming the food product grown with wastewater since decades. And they really did not have any health impact. They were careful enough not to use the wastewater which had industrial contaminants. So the problem is not with the domestic contaminants, but industrial contaminant. That is the learning from the field. So we then started thinking that, okay, how do you link rural and urban so that this wastewater which is generated in urban areas can be used in rural areas? So we also found some of the municipalities in Gujarat, in Karnataka and elsewhere that they had entered into a transaction between the municipality and the villages. So municipalities were bound to supply wastewater to farmers or farmers cooperatives at a nominal rate. And sometimes they also charged the irrigation rates, the canal rates. And this was a binding which made farmers also happy because there was a reliability of supply, and it was formalization of wastewater use for irrigation, which was very welcome from the farmers as well as municipality. For municipality, it's a nuisance and they have to get rid of it. And this was a happy situation for them to get rid of it. In today's imagery of wastewater management, what is happening is you have this in larger cities, you have these centralized STPs which treat the water, and then they also bypass some of the raw wastewater, and both of it gets mixed and goes into a river. And then the river flows downstreams, and those villages extract that water and use it for irrigation. They pump it up. Now, can we change this imagination that the question is only of conveyance of this wastewater which is being generated in cities, and how do you send it to villages for use? Is it possible that villages use this water themselves and treat it on their farmland, because there the land is not an issue, so land treatment would be possible. The only responsibility which city and society would have is not let industrial contaminant enter it. You have to segregate industrial and domestic waste and then send it to these agricultural lands, and they could use it and treat it on the farm as required. Concerns of public health remain. That is generally, when you lift the wastewater, irrigate with wastewater, that time the farmers or the workers who are exposed to it, there are chances that they get skin disease, which is possible. So that is one. Then second, also they wash it with wastewater. That is a bigger concern, because then, in that case, what would happen if somebody in the city dweller is eating the vegetables or the food crop raw, then there are chances of disease. So how do there is a guideline by WHO which is called Sanitation Safety Plan. Sanitation Safety Plan provides guideline from farm to fork. So there are different phases where you can have different mitigation strategies. So at the farm level, and which we have seen in the field, what farmers do themselves is they channel the wastewater into a natural drain, let it flow for some time, so it disinfects. Then they put it in a settling tank. So there are actually pond-based treatment technologies also, which is sufficient for domestic wastewater treatment, and we have tested it at many places where in smaller towns where there are stabilization ponds are there, whether the treatment is enough or not. So here farmer in his own field or her own field is also putting the water in a settling tank and let it remain for some gestation period so that it disinfects and there is no contamination in it. Then they pump it into a furrow. It flows into the furrow again, and then he applies it into the field. So this kind of precautions can be taken for making it safe for farmers and for the consumers. In some parts of Karnataka, with the support of WHO, they have established this washing centers for the food product before you take it to market. So there is fresh water provided. Instead of wastewater, they get to wash their food products in this particular center and then send it to the market. So these are risk mitigation strategies at each and every stage. Then I was going to present the case study of Ahmedabad itself. When I started tracking the wastewater, what is happening to wastewater which is coming out of STPs. So I saw that in the downstream, 46 villages were reusing this wastewater on the coast of Sabarmati for irrigation, for agriculture. So I have these photographs now, how wastewater leaves the city, where it is mixed, fresh, partially treated, untreated, and fully treated wastewater gets mixed and it flows into Sabarmati. It flows till it is used. Then how farmers, pump this wastewater to a great distance. So there is a case study of a farmer called Bhailal. Bhailal is taking this water almost 7 kilometers away. His farm is 7 kilometers away. He's pumping that because for him it's a resource. There is a capital investment which he is making to get the wastewater. So it is valuable for him and all the other farmers there. So we've also seen that on wherever there are wastewater channels, there are a series of pump houses, and there are photographs in my presentation, series of pump houses. That means many farmers, wherever there is an opportunity, they are taking away wastewater for irrigation. Then what do they do? So this farmers are also smart. As I was saying earlier, that farmers mitigate the risk by treating it at their farm, by putting it in a settling tank and then putting it in furrow and let it flow for some gestation time and all. So here what farmers are also doing is they're diverting the wastewater, at times even diluting it. And they are also storing wastewater for a use when there is critical period of crop when the irrigation is required. So there are some photographs which are showing that, which would have been interesting for all of you to see. Then what are the crops which they take from this? So this range of crops: tobacco, jawar, alfalfa, wheat, castor, mustard, flowers, roses, cotton, soybean. There are many things. Then what can we do in such a scenario where, you know, you're seeing that city is not treating their wastewater, sending it out, and we also know that, you know, it can be treated on lands. So how do we intervene? So there are two things, you know, that bring out these mechanisms which are done by these local urban bodies, informal institutions, as a response to dual function of reusing the wastewater and reducing consumption of fresh water for growing food. We have to also understand that, you know, before taking out orders like this, that burn all the crops which is grown with wastewater, we have to see that growing food is not the responsibility of farmer alone. It's a collective responsibility, and everybody has to think about it, how food will be grown if more and more irrigation water is now diverted to cities. The second and most important thing is explore possible alternative arrangements, both formal and informal, to promote agriculture using wastewater. So for that, we have to first document and map how much is the informal use in a city, in the surrounding of a city of wastewater. So then I am talking about a case study of Rajkot, where we have done a study and found that there are how many? 12 villages, 16 villages which are using this wastewater and irrigating with it. And the profit of these, and we did an exploratory exercise, and we found that actually agricultural receipt of these crops which is grown with this wastewater is 25 crores, and productivity is 2 to 2.5 times higher than fresh water. This is all because of the nutrient which is there in wastewater. We also have to see that the wastewater, domestic wastewater, human excreta has phosphorus, and phosphorus is a mineral which is depleting largely, and it cannot be regenerated. So it's there available in a very limited quantity, and it's a building block for human body as well as for plants. And this recycling of wastewater for irrigation is the only way you can recycle phosphorus. There is no other way. Otherwise, wastewater along with the phosphorus would go to sea, and there will be a serious crisis of phosphorus. Then we are trying and promoting this wastewater institute.
Alka, I'm sorry.
This is the last one.
Yeah, okay.
Last one. Yeah, so we are promoting this wastewater institutions where, you know, we collect the farmers and then also try and negotiate with the municipalities so that this wastewater can be supplied to them in a regular way. There can be an agreement between municipality and farmers cooperative. It can be formed. It is good. Otherwise, to individual farmers. So in Rajkot, there are 3 of them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alka. I think you brought out some very amazing points in terms of the reuse of wastewater and how farmers are trying to use their local knowledge, traditional knowledge, to really, treat that wastewater and then use it for agriculture. They feel that the produce is probably not harmful as long as, the industrial water is not mixed with it. Something that you have tested, and I'm sure that probably has a potential of scaling up, we will definitely try to connect with you, and we would like to take it forward further to really have your presentation in detail. In the meantime, Alka, I would really like you that if you can try and share your slides with me at the end of the presentation, at least I can scroll through the slides and show it to the participants. So you may try. Yeah.
I will put it in your drive.
Yes, please. That would be really helpful. Manisha, so in the meantime, I would like to invite Manisha, the discussant, the young youthful discussant who we have today with us. As I told you that she's an architect and an urban planner. All the issues, Manisha, that we have been discussing is around, urban planning and how people would be really, our urban areas would be having like supporting 50% of the population by 2050. Obviously, the load on water, the load on food is going to go up with population of the world increasing to 9 billion by 2050. A lot of things, which are very, very closely interconnected. So what are your thoughts? I know you're doing amazing work in Auroville. Maybe a few glimpse of your work and what you would like. What is a question from a youth to the experts who have been working on field?
Sure, ma'am. I would like to share my screen. Oh, we can see Alka, ma'am, finally.
Yes, please, sir.
Is it visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
So I would not want to take much time, and I'll just go through few slides which I worked on as an urban planner with the Auroville Town Development Council. So Auroville's vision, or let's say the perspective plan, has been given like some 50 years back. And I got the opportunity to work as a planner with a big team of experts from water sector, waste management sector, and all sorts of other experts. And we proposed a detailed development plan for one particular area. Are my slides moving? Yeah. So Auroville, if many people might be knowing that Auroville is a universal township, and with a vision by Sri Aurobindo and Mira Alfasa, who is popularly known here as the mother. So Auroville's location is somewhere here in India's map, very close to Puducherry Union Territory and towards the east coast. So this is the location of Auroville here, and you can see in this map the lot of water bodies in and around. So the Auroville perspective vision, which was proposed some 50 years back, was that there's a peace area in the center, and it's like a radial plan with a city area with 4 zones, and beyond this is the green belt which has been proposed. This is just a 3D. There is a model, a conceptual model, block model given, which proposes what are these 4 zones and what actually they mean. So our focus area was this residential zone. Is my cursor visible? Because I'll be moving it.
Not really. Can you move it around so that we can check it?
Yeah, I'm moving.
No, it isn't visible. But
okay, then
below
I'll
the
use
screen, you can use a laser, this thing. You will see on your screen at the bottom left-hand side, you can select the laser pen and you can use it. Yep.
Is it visible, the laser point?
Perfect,
okay.
Perfect.
Yes.
So as I told, this is a residential zone in the master plan, and we focused on these 2 sectors. And these 2 sectors basically are part of the residential zone, which has 5 sectors. So the densities proposed were increasing from 1 to 5. And this is a zoomed in image of these 2 sectors, which we had to do a detailed development plan for. Now, the idea is that there's already a vision given by Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and it was conceptualized in a built form by the French architect Roger, who has planned the whole the city plan. So our task was to bridge the gap between this vision, which has been given some 50 years back, and make sure that whatever is needed today and for the future, we can design something. So these are the 2 sectors in detail. And as you can see, these blue hatch lines are the private land parcels, which are already still existing. And the brown ones are the existing buildings, which are already in place in these 2 sectors, and the existing infrastructure. So we had to somehow find a way that what can be proposed so that the vision can be achieved, considering the ground realities. the first thing what we did was that we had to find some critical zones, some no-go zones where we cannot touch. So these were from the GIS experts who were working in the whole team. We mapped all these, the existing trees and the TDF clusters and also the private lands, the watershed areas, the channels. In Tamil, they are called Odai Porambos. These are water canyons, like marked as government land. So these were the areas which were critical, and we made sure that we have to design something around them so that they are not disturbed and well respected. So in Auroville, I'll just try to give a brief concept of what the mobility concept here is. So there's a Matri Mandir in the center, and around it there is a road called Crown Way. Beyond that, there is one more road, which is the Outer Ring Road, and these two roads divide the whole planning in a peace area in the center, then there's city area, and then there is a green belt. So the idea of Crown Way is that it has to be more pedestrianized and like a public transit zone, which was envisioned long back, which is not prevalent right now. And there's this Outer Ring Road, which is like a connection to the outer world. And again, now there are radials which connect these two roads. And the idea is that as you move from Outer Ring Road to the Crown Way, it has to go more pedestrian. So it's not just the green blue, but also the gray infrastructure has to be designed such a way that we respect this blue green infrastructure. And then there was something called green corridors, which was proposed, which we also tried to incorporate with calling it GIT corridors, Green Infrastructure Transit Corridors. And the idea was that they will be moving through the sectors and subsectors like nature, so that they could be the walkways in the green. Is my
okay. Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Okay. We can see your screen as well.
So the final proposal which we gave was something like this for these two sectors. Our purpose was to assign densities to the pocket. And one very wonderful part about Auroville is that nobody owns land here. So even if you see these lines, they're not supposed to be any boundaries. So these lines are just for the sake of calculations which we did and to assign any pocket. So varying densities are proposed, like keeping in mind the vision which was already there, that is the densities assigned to these two sectors and the target population which we had in mind. And finally, from the water expert, we received this. So ultimately, what we had to do was that we had to give them detailed guidelines. So like development guidelines, I can say. So these development guidelines were the part of the detailed development plan report which we submitted. And this included, like if you can see this storage pond here, even if we open up this pocket here, that person has to make sure, whoever is constructing here or whoever is designing, that person has to make sure that this storage pond remains. So there's like a direction given to the future planning so that you respect this blue-green infrastructure. And with this, I would like to end. I'm not going much in detail about the presentation, about the work we did, but I would like to show some more photographs which are already existing in this land. So as both Ranjana ma'am and Alka ma'am have already talked that there's something called nature-based wastewater treatment techniques and like traditional systems through which we have been conserving water and managing and respecting water. So I have found various beautiful examples here in Auroville, which I would like to show to all the participants, that these are the places where the water-loving plants' roots are cleaning the water naturally. This is just few photographs I would like to show. This is again a polishing pond for a community. So there are communities inside Auroville, and there are community-based systems which are already in place here. This is another example, and this is a rainwater harvesting tank for one particular community. And this example is very beautiful that it is not for a community; it is just for one single house, which has only 4 to 5 users. And the beautiful part is that maybe we can find inspiration that, like I find inspiration when I see these images, when I see these live, that why can't I incorporate all this in my design, in my when I do designing in my site landscaping. And this can actually be, I mean, wastewater treatment can also be so beautiful. So this is something which we all can learn. And with this, I would like to end. Thank you.
Manisha, that was really great. And I think some very nice examples that you saw, probably that which can be emulated at other places as well. What's your question to the speakers? Do you have any specific questions that you would like to ask?
Yes, yes, definitely. More than questions, I think it can be just a discussion. I mean, I can put some thoughts. So, as I was showing these photographs, we have these decentralized systems of treating water, managing water, and reusing the wastewater. Like I know examples where this water is even reused for flushing and wherever possible. So, what do you suggest? Because I think both of you have been saying that we have these STPs sitting, but then I don't know how far they are actually functioning or they are actually cleaning the water. And ultimately, the fresh water, if it is getting mixed with the contaminated water, actually there's no point in the STP sitting. So how can we promote this decentralized system, and what should be the scale of this decentralized system? Like when we say decentralized, it should go down to one particular household or communities, or how much can should we decentralize? That is one question which we could start with.
I think I would really like to get thoughts from both Ranjana and Alka, because they will bring different perspectives, as I can see. Ranjana, over to you first, and then Alka maybe to respond.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. In fact, what I have seen, the first bit is that these have to be small scale, as in 100 kiloliters per day, 500, never more than that, because then it becomes massive. So, like in case of Delhi, I can tell you that we have the agriculture, IARI, the Indian Agriculture Research Institute, Pusa Road. They have a constructed wetland system which functions, and they use that recycled water for all their residential quarters and for some of the agriculture that they do. Similarly, the Sanjayvan forest, it was, of course, the groundwater reserves were dwindling. So they take water, again, secondary treated water, not tertiary treated water, from the Vasant Kunj sewage treatment plant, and they use it and treat it further. But what people have done, especially in case of a place like Delhi, there are these smaller urban villages that we have. So they have connected all their wastewater there. So ultimately, again, it is mixing with raw sewage.
Yeah.
So there is some amount of oxygen that is available, the dissolved oxygen, and some treatment is happening, but only so much. There is a lot of potential, but I feel the decentralized system also need to be monitored very careful. If we could have citizen groups and architects and civil engineers coming together, and citizens who really want to get involved, that could be the way forward. That's what I would like to say on this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Alka, if you are around, if you can switch on your camera, it would be amazing. Yep.
A very good question.
Yes.
So firstly, the definition of centralized and decentralized itself is very questionable. It's not really defined in a very good manner. So if you look at the literature, what is decentralized and what is centralized is not clear. But as I understand, you are talking about the systems which exist in Auroville. Those are generally which do not require energy. That is what you are referring to?
No, ma'am. They are nature-based, and mostly they do not require.
Yeah. So they would, firstly, they would require more of land. As I was mentioning, there is always a trade-off between energy and land. So when you design, you will have to see that much land is available. First is that. Second, there would be some amount of maintenance because you are dealing with plants. So DWAT system deals with plants, right? So in a institution or in a residential building, this would work fine, where the maintenance is possible. But if it's a public thing, I really doubt it. There were so many DWATs which have become dysfunctional as well as STPs. That is second. Third, and which is a concern, is the ruling of NGT which has happened. With these standards now which are there due to NGT standards, the DWAT system does not treat it to that standard. So that would become a question. Actually, you're not treating it to the standards which are now required. For that, tertiary treatment is required, and which cannot be done by any of these vegetative systems. Okay. So that becomes an issue. Okay.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, both of you. I think we can take some other question, or should?
Yeah. So there is a question in the chat box wherein I would request Alka to respond first. Looks like it's come from an environmental law background person who says that I have this question for both the speakers and moderator. How can a person with environmental law background help and contribute in your respective organizations?
Oh, lot of space.
So you have spoken about NGT, and I think you can definitely give few tips as to how, if not at least in our organizations, what is the role of a person with an environmental law background? Huh?
Yeah. So, firstly, I mean, the two things which has to be brought out by public for the policies. One is the NGT ruling has come up because of the activists, wanting it that rivers are getting polluted. So there should be more stringent standards for disposing water into rivers, freshwater bodies. But in a way, it's detrimental because now the treatment systems. I go and ask in municipalities that how are you going to really comply with these standards? You cannot, because you have to upgrade all the STPs, and that kind of money for Bangalore or Bangalore itself, I think the cost was some 20,000 crores. If you have to really do that. Or Rajkot, it would be like around like 50 crores, and they really cannot allocate that kind of budget. So NGT ruling has come, but these rulings are purely from environmental perspective. You have to bring in people's views. When you frame any policy, what about the people's views? People who are users, who are using it right now. They just want that industrial wastewater and domestic wastewater should be separated and sent it to them. At least that much, that's minimum, and that can be done easily. That is one. So you have to question this NGT standards, one. And second, how will you bring in the existing users, which are millions of farmers, into the law and policy and acts? Because there are 10 states which have come out with wastewater reuse policies. None of them mention it. None of them. Zero. Yeah.
That's amazing. Ranjana, would you like to add something more?
I think she has, addressed it very well, and nothing more to add. But, literally policy is something that our policies are so weak. Definitely people with law background can help us a lot, So that's what I would say. Very happy to hear that somebody wants to work in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Alka and Ranjana has already said. In fact, we at TERI School of Advanced Studies, so since you were asking about our respective institutions, we do have programs around water science and governance, even our MTech program in water resources engineering and management that we have. Both the programs have a course on water law. So we do feel that even engineers or social scientists or whosoever is working in the field of water, I think water law is integral to all the programs. That said, you would see that while our acts and regulations are very good, very detailed, very detailed about what should be the industrial wastewater disposal policy that has to be there, or what are the water standards which are there. If you look at the CPCB guidelines on the different water standards, everything is very clearly documented. So our documents are very comprehensive. Our enforcement is very, very weak. And even if it comes to a PIL, people like you can come forward and actually file a PIL. On its own, NGT also cannot take action. They can only take action if there is a public litigation that is there, or if there is somebody who has raised an issue about it. Suo moto, even NGT is not allowed to take action. So it's very, very important, role of environmental lawyers is only increasing over time. Corporates are also looking at environmental, social, and corporate governance, wherein again, a lot of requirement for environmental lawyers are there, or people who have specialized in this. We also have, along with that, environmental impact assessment. I'm sure all of you are aware of EIA, the latest one, the draft one, which is now probably is going to replace the EIA 2006. As it was pretty diluted, and we have heard so much about the new EIA. a role that probably lawyers can play in that would also be phenomenal. So I can go just on and on, but great question. Yes, our regulations are super weak, and we really need to have people on board who can look at these and who can take action against these, flouting of laws that are there. Manisha, you wanted to add something. Please go ahead. And Mansi as well.
Actually, yes, that was also one thing which was there in my mind, that how much have these, good practices penetrated into the policies, standards, and norms of our nation, and also to the local level. Apart from that, I feel there is something which is required from the citizens and that sort also. Like many times we see that we are always like blaming the government, but there is a behavioral change needed from us, from the citizens also. So how can the end users, or actually the end polluters, also take an action, and what can be done on that phase to raise actual awareness so that they also do take a step towards sustainable water management?
So that's a great question, and since Mansi has raised her hand, I would also like her to take that question and respond. Yes, Mansi. You please unmute yourself.
Good evening, and thank you, Fauzia, for allowing me to speak. And thanks both Alka and Ranjana. It is always pleasure to listen to you girls. And Manisha showing Auroville. Actually, I was going to raise this point that we need to change our pattern of lifestyle. And Ranjana did try to answer me a little bit earlier as talking about our SDG 12. So whenever we talk about SDG 12, I think it is a pledge we have to make as academicians and scholars, that we should talk always with SDG 12 and not talk in isolation for SDG 6. I think that's a pledge we have to make. And also at every platforms, we need to go and tell that SDG 6 does not work. It can only work with other SDGs. It is a hollow SDG if we don't take it with other. And I think I was actually raising my hand for Shruti, that Shruti, I think if you have a crowd of environmental lawyers, the country is desperately requiring you guys. So it is just that you have to connect. That is what also Wednesdays for Water is doing. So I need a lawyer for a long time to make a shout about lakes and ponds. I don't know anything about it. So yes, I will stop here. Thank you, Fauzia. You may take it on, please.
Thank you very much, Mansi. And also to respond to Manisha's question on citizen engagement, it's very, very important. You know, in India, probably we have the most complacent citizens in the world. So we really don't have people, they get back home and they just chill and relax. They don't really come together and talk about these issues. Wherever transformation has happened, even traditionally, if you look at our movements which required social transformation or which required bending of rules, even flouting of EIA guidelines and people, whether it is Vedanta or whether it is, even for that matter, the other forests wherever we had problem, it was people's initiative probably which prevented the forests from getting destroyed. So it is citizens definitely can make a lot of difference. It's very heartening to see youth come forward, which is something I am seeing, whether it is Fridays for Future or many such youth groups. So Fridays for Future has become quite popular, but in smaller groups, even on Twitter, I see a few very young, school-going youth who are taking a lot of action, who are questioning the government. So right now, probably with social media out there, we can actually make a very good use of it by tagging the government and then trying to ask them difficult questions. Our generation probably didn't take the risk of doing it, but your generation, I see, doing it a lot over the social media, asking difficult questions, not just to the government, to the policymakers, to NGOs, to organizations. I know recently it was in the news that Flipkart has stopped all single-use plastics, for instance. It was a youth movement which I saw. It was an ongoing youth movement, I would say, on the Twitter, which actually made this transformation happen. A lot of youth you would see taking up individual lakes and ponds and trying to clear that up. So that gives us a lot of hope. So with that, I think this is one topic which is so close to all of us who are present here. And again, what better day to talk about it than World Nature Conservation Day. So once again, greetings to all of you on World Nature Conservation Day. Many thanks, Ranjana, Alka, and Manisha, for joining us today and sharing such amazing thoughts, wastewater and water, and also about how different, how different technologies are being implemented on ground, how there is a need to engage with community, how community themselves, how they organize and how they are able to form local level institutions to take initiatives forward, and a lot of things that we have learned today. I would like to thank the Wednesdays for Water team. Mansi is there, Ganesh was also here, and then I have Megha and Vasanta and Bibhu and many of you who are there. Please pardon me if I miss any names, but it has been a great initiative, and I'm so proud to say that we are growing from strength to strength. So that's such a pleasure. So nice to see you, Ganesh, there. Huh? Thank you for switching on the camera. Next week we have a quiz, and we would really like people to come forward and join the quiz. We would be sharing the registration link for the quiz shortly. Bibhu, thank you so much. I'm so happy to see my Wednesdays for Water team switching on their cameras. That's really lovely. So while I talk, I also print screen to capture you all. And also we have every Wednesday, we do come together to organize something. So on the second and the fourth Wednesday, we have a talk. On the first Wednesday of every month, we have a quiz. And then on the third Wednesday, and if at all there's a fifth Wednesday, we do keep some soft session, what we say, but something very amazing. Like last time we had art for water, and we had some amazing dancers who were there. I missed it personally, but we do keep a lot of, so keep following us. We are there on LinkedIn. We are there on Twitter, we are on Instagram and Facebook. So please follow us on all social media and you will be getting to know about our various initiatives. Once again, my IT team who is there, I should not miss to thank them. They have always been a huge support who are there, Jakpreet and if Yogesh and others who have joined me today. Thank you very much for your constant support. Pooja, of course, I don't think she's joined, but she's also been a great support in this program. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day and a nice evening. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Another great session. Huh? Thank you so much.
Really great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful session today.
Yes, we all are online. Huh? It's a good capture. Finally, we see Alka
okay. You can continue to speak.
Yeah. Finally, we see Alka after her presentation.
Alka, I did get your presentation. I was really keen, but you do send it across. I have the list of registered participants. I could actually share with them. Huh?
Yeah.
Good to see you all. Hey.
Bye-bye.
Okay, see you.
See you.
See you
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a great evening.